Lena had only 3 seconds to make a choice. She could stay silent and let the most dangerous man in the city marry a woman who planned to kill him, or she could kiss him in front of 300 armed criminals and ruin her own life. Her hands were shaking as she stepped toward the wedding altar. Armed guards already had their hands on their guns. The beautiful bride, Serena, smiled at her groom, Adrian Volkov, not knowing that a waitress was about to destroy her lies. Lena knew that as a simple worker, no one would believe her if she just tried to talk. She needed a way to make the Mafia boss pay attention. She walked straight up to the man with the sharp jawline and slicked back hair, grabbed his suit jacket, and pressed her lips against his. The wedding room exploded with noise the moment they touched. Guests gasped in shock, and glasses of champagne fell from stunned hands, shattering on the marble floor. Men who usually killed without fear suddenly shifted in their seats, their hands hovering over hidden weapons. In the middle of the chaos stood Adrian Volkov, tall and perfectly still in his black suit. Even with everyone screaming, he remained the most dangerous person in the room. The kiss only lasted a few seconds, but that was all the time Lena needed. She secretly pressed her warm phone into his palm, with the recording of his bride's betrayal still playing. Leaning close to his ear, she whispered for him to watch it and not react, just as the guards grabbed her and pulled her away. The guards dragged Lena away from the altar and into a small, cold room with no windows. The sound of the heavy door locking behind her echoed like a final goodbye. Lena sat down slowly and folded her hands in her lap to keep them from shaking. She knew she had likely just thrown her life away, but she couldn't stand by and watch a man be murdered by the people he trusted. Meanwhile, in a private office, Adrian Volkov looked down at the phone Lena had pressed into his hand. His face was unreadable, like stone. He played the recording, and the voice of his fiancée, Serena, filled the room. She wasn't speaking about love or their future, she was talking about his death. She spoke about accidents, and how everything would be in her name once he was gone. Adrian's grip tightened on the phone until his knuckles turned white. Back in the wedding hall, the silence was heavy and terrifying. Serena was trying to fix her dress, her face red with anger as she demanded that the crazy waitress be punished. But the doors opened, and Adrian stepped back out alone. He didn't look like a happy groom, he looked like a man ready for war. He walked straight to Serena and looked at her with eyes that cut like a blade. He didn't raise his voice, which made it even scarier. He held up the phone and played the recording loud enough for the people in the front row to hear. Serena's face went from angry to ghostly white in a second. Her perfect smile was gone, replaced by pure fear. "The party is over," Adrian said, his voice calm and deadly. "Everyone out. Now." No one argued with him. Within minutes, the grand hall began to empty as guests scrambled to leave. Serena tried to grab his arm, crying and begging him to listen, but Adrian simply turned his back on her. He ordered his guards to take her away and lock her up until he decided what to do with the traitor. Adrian then walked toward the small room where Lena was waiting. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, closing it behind him. Lena stood up instantly, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Adrian placed her phone on the table between them. "I watched it," he said quietly. "All of it." He studied her face, trying to understand why a complete stranger would risk everything for him. For the first time, Lena didn't look away. Adrian stood across from Lena, his sharp eyes searching her face. "I know what you heard," he said, his voice calm but heavy. "What I don't know is why a waitress would risk her life to warn me." Lena took a shaky breath and looked down at her hands. She had spent so long trying to be invisible, but now the truth was the only thing that could save her. "I didn't do it for you," she whispered. Adrian's brow lifted slightly in surprise. "I did it for me. I couldn't live with myself if I did nothing." She told him that she hadn't planned the kiss. She had only panicked because there was no other way to get his attention in a room full of people. Adrian leaned back against the table and watched her closely. "You're not just afraid of me," he said quietly. "You're running from someone else." Lena's chest tightened as the name she hated to say finally crossed her lips. "His name is Marcus," she said, her voice barely steady. She explained how Marcus used to say he loved her, but then he began to control every part of her life. When she tried to leave him, he followed her and threatened her. She had gone to the police, but they only told her to change her number or move to a new city. "Like fear is something you can just pack into a bag and leave behind," she said with a bitter laugh. Lena had taken the job as a waitress because she learned how to disappear in a room. She worked in places where no one cared enough to ask questions so that Marcus could never find her. She had been hiding in plain sight for months, but tonight, she realized she couldn't stay hidden anymore. Adrian stayed silent for a long moment, letting her words hang in the air. He saw the bruises that fear had left on her heart, even if they weren't visible on her skin. Finally, he stood up and walked toward her. "That man will not touch you again," he promised. "You saved my life, and now you are under my protection." Lena looked up at him, her heart skipping a beat. For the first time in a very long time, she felt like she might finally be safe. Adrian knew that simply hiding Lena wouldn't be enough to keep her safe. Serena came from a powerful family that would want revenge for the humiliation at the wedding. He looked at Lena and saw how small she felt in her stained waitress uniform. He realized that to protect her completely, he had to change how the world looked at her. "There is one way to make sure no one touches you," Adrian said slowly. He explained that Serena's family was already making plans to hurt anyone close to him. Lena's heart raced as she listened. Adrian stepped closer and told her his idea. He proposed a marriage. Lena laughed because she couldn't believe what she was hearing. She told him she couldn't marry him. But Adrian wasn't talking about love. He was offering her a shield. He explained that it would be a contract for a limited time. Once the danger was gone, she would be free to walk away with a new name and a new life. "Why me?" Lena asked softly. Adrian told her it was because she was brave and had told the truth even when it could have killed her. He needed someone beside him that he could finally trust. Lena thought about the world outside. She thought about Marcus following her and Serena's family waiting in the dark. She looked at Adrian and asked if he would promise not to control her. He gave her his word. "Then we do it," Lena whispered, her voice shaking. Adrian nodded once, and a dark, protective look filled his eyes. He told her that from that moment on, she was his to protect. As she closed her fingers around the simple ring he gave her, Lena wasn't sure if she should feel safe or terrified, but she knew her life would never be the same. The news of the new marriage spread faster than Lena expected. By the next morning, the world already knew that Adrian had chosen her. She could feel the change in the way the guards looked at her. They were no longer dismissive, they were alert and respectful, as if she had crossed an invisible line overnight. Her first public appearance came sooner than she was ready for. It was a private dinner with Adrian's highest-ranking allies. These were dangerous men who needed to see that Adrian was still in control. Lena stood beside him, dressed in elegant clothes that felt like a costume. Her heart hammered against her ribs as every eye in the room assessed her. She felt completely exposed, like a target in the bright lights. Adrian noticed her tension and leaned closer, his voice low and steady. "Breathe," he whispered. "They are watching me, not you." But Lena knew that wasn't true. As they walked through the crowd, Adrian rested his hand lightly at the small of her back. The touch wasn't possessive, it was anchoring, a silent promise that he wouldn't let her fall. The effect of that small gesture was immediate. The energy in the room shifted. Men who had been staring with cold judgment suddenly smiled and spoke to her with great care. They chose their words carefully, afraid to offend the woman standing next to the boss. Lena realized then what being his wife really meant. It was power by proximity. Later that night, when they finally returned to the quiet of the house, the tension in Lena's body finally broke. She kicked off her heels and sank onto the couch, feeling exhausted. "I don't know how you do this every day," she said softly. Adrian loosened his tie and looked at her. "You learn not to feel it," he admitted. "That sounds lonely," Lena replied. A small flicker of something passed across Adrian's face, an admission that surprised them both. It is, he said quietly. For a moment, they just sat there in the silence, two people bound together by a contract, yet starting to see the real person behind the roles they were forced to play. The days passed, and the invisible wall between Lena and Adrian began to crumble. It wasn't because of a grand speech, but because of the small things. Lena learned that Adrian hated the heavy silence of the house and that he always removed his watch before a difficult talk. Adrian learned that Lena liked her coffee black and that she slept with the lights on when the memories of her past felt too heavy. They began to share meals that felt less like business meetings and more like two people finally finding a safe place to land. One evening, after a long and stressful day of dealing with his territory, Adrian sat beside Lena on the couch instead of across the room. Lena stiffened at first, her body remembering the times when a man getting close meant danger. Adrian noticed and started to pull back, promising he wouldn't cross any lines. But Lena realized she didn't want him to leave. She leaned back and told him he could stay. I used to think that being alone was the only way to be safe, Lena said softly, looking at the city lights through the window. Adrian looked at her, his expression softening in a way he never allowed anyone else to see. I used to think that caring about someone was a weakness, he admitted. They sat there for a long time, their shoulders barely touching, yet the air between them felt electric. Adrian turned to her, his voice dropping to a whisper. He told her that he wouldn't lie about what he was starting to feel. He promised he wouldn't touch her unless she told him to. Lena's heart hammered in her chest, but for the first time, it wasn't because of fear. It was because she was tired of pretending that this marriage was just a strategy. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers tracing the tattoos on his skin. Then she leaned in and kissed him. This kiss was nothing like the one at the wedding. That one had been a desperate act to save a life, but this one was slow, careful, and real. When they pulled apart, Adrian's hand remained on her cheek, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. They both knew that the contract couldn't protect them from what was happening in their hearts. The peace they had found didn't last long. Lena was in the kitchen when her phone buzzed with a message from a number she didn't know. Her heart stopped as she opened the image. It was her younger sister, Mila, tied up and bruised. Beneath the photo were the words she had feared for years, "Come alone or she dies." Lena's hands shook so violently that the phone clattered to the floor. She felt like she couldn't breathe, the old terror of Marcus slamming back into her chest. Adrian saw the change in her face instantly and rushed to her side. He picked up the phone, and his expression turned into something cold and dangerous. "He's trying to remind you that he still exists," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a low growl. Lena grabbed his arm, her eyes filled with tears. She begged him to let her go to Marcus, thinking it was the only way to save her sister. But Adrian's grip on her was firm and protective. "You aren't going anywhere near him," Adrian commanded. He explained that Marcus wanted her to be scared and sloppy. Lena cried out that Mila was her responsibility, but Adrian cupped her face gently with his hands. "She is my responsibility now, too," he promised her. "I told you that no one who saves me walks away unguarded." He vowed that he would not lose Lena or her sister. As Adrian began barking orders into his phone to call his men together, Lena felt a mix of pure dread and a strange kind of hope. She knew that Adrian was going to war, and this time, there would be no more hiding. Marcus had made a move, but he didn't realize that he was no longer hunting a woman who was alone. Adrian didn't go to the warehouse alone. He let Marcus believe he would come by himself because that was the difference between being angry and being in control. The location was a falling-apart warehouse near the river, filled with rusted steel and broken windows. It was the kind of place where people disappeared without anyone asking questions. Adrian arrived first and stepped out of his car with nothing but his phone. He had the kind of calm look on his face that always came before violence. Marcus walked out from the shadows, smiling a mean smile. He told Adrian that he must really care about Lena to show up like this. Adrian's eyes were empty as he asked where the girl was. Marcus laughed and said they should talk first, but Adrian told him this would be the last conversation he ever had. Marcus reached for his gun, but Adrian was faster. Adrian held up his phone and gave a signal. Suddenly, the bright lights snapped on, and Adrian's men poured out of the shadows. They were armed and efficient. Marcus panicked because he realized he had been tricked. Gunfire erupted in the room, but it was over quickly. Marcus fell to his knees, his eyes wide with disbelief. Adrian stepped closer and told him that he would never get to hurt Lena again. He wouldn't even get to say her name. The final shot was quiet. When Adrian returned home hours later, the house was silent. Lena was waiting in the living room, her eyes red from crying but her body alert. She stood up the moment she saw him and asked about her sister. "She's safe," Adrian said immediately. He told her that Mila was already on a plane with a new identity and protection. Lena's knees gave out from the relief, and Adrian caught her before she hit the floor. She sobbed into his chest, letting go of all the grief and fear she had been carrying alone. Adrian held her and promised that the war was finally over. In the days that followed, the house felt different. For the first time, there were no hidden threats or phones vibrating with bad news. There was only quiet. Lena stood on the balcony watching the city, feeling like she could finally breathe again. When Adrian joined her, they stood together in the silence, no longer needing to hide from the shadows. Adrian didn't waste any time. He began to quietly dismantle the empire that had kept him tied to a world of violence. He sold his assets and ended the alliances that required him to carry a gun. Some people in his world didn't approve, but no one was brave enough to challenge him. Lena watched him change, feeling a mix of hope and fear that something might still go wrong. One evening, Adrian came home earlier than usual and found Lena in the kitchen, barefoot and humming as she cooked. The sight of her in his home, peaceful and safe, was exactly what he had been fighting for. He walked up to her and told her that he was done with his old life. He wanted a future where she never had to look over her shoulder again. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the marriage contract they had signed. Without saying a word, he tore the papers in half. He told her that he didn't need a deal to keep her by his side anymore. He wanted it to be her choice. Lena looked at the torn pieces of paper and then at the man who had risked everything to save her. "I love you," she said, the words surprising her with how true they felt. Adrian pulled her close, admitting that he had loved her since the moment she chose his life over her own safety at the wedding. Months later, they had a real wedding. It wasn't about contracts or mafia business. It was about two people choosing each other. As they stood together beneath soft lights, Adrian kissed her hair and told her that she was enough for him. They had survived the darkness, and now they finally had a life that belonged only to them.